Luke forward, I want to talk a little bit about where does Judaism differ from Christianity. And first, my background, I grew up the son of a Seventh-day Adventist theologian. So when I was a kid, about second or third grade, my parents caught me telling a lot of lies. And so as punishment for a couple of years, I had to read 40 pages of dense Christian apologetics every day and type a one-page summary. So that's how I learned to touch type. And I learned all the arguments for Christianity, but I developed this really strong emotional reaction against this assignment. And so perhaps I learned many of the intellectual arguments for Christianity, but developed a real hatred of Christianity in my heart. I hope I've overcome these psychological imprints. But I grew up a preacher's kid, and so people would often tell on me to my father. And my father was always involved in these theological arguments. And then we moved out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1980 when I was 14. At 15, I started in my sophomore year of high school. I went to a public school for the first time. And I steadily moved out of Christianity. So by age 18, I was an atheist. And then I encountered Judaism for the first time when I went to UCLA. In 1988, I was 23 years old. And I met Jews for the first time, and I was fascinated. And one of the Jews that I encountered was a talk show host by the name of Dennis Prager. He had this weekend show on KABC radio. And in the summer of 1989, I picked up his book, The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. And I was so sick at the time. I had chronic fatigue syndrome for about 6 years. I had my parents read it to me. And so you can imagine how they would have liked chapter 4. How does Judaism differ from Christianity, Marxism, and communism, and humanism? So the authors say these three movements have three things in common. Each was founded by a Jew. Each is a derivative of Judaism, seeking to fulfill the messianic and utopian goals which Judaism introduced, but each changed the Jewish way of attaining these goals. So I found that interesting. When I was a Christian, I just thought Judaism was basically Christianity without the Christ. I thought that Jews were kind of hanging around, waiting for the Messiah to come, that they were kind of lost to history, lost souls. And I didn't think much about them. I did read all the Chaim Potok novels when I was about 14, 15, 16. But never for a second did I even consider converting to this way of life. I just thought, what a strange, interesting people, but they struck me as kind of irrelevant to the world. So whether or not Jesus was the Messiah is not the most important question that divides Judaism and Christianity. The major difference between Judaism and Christianity lies in the importance each religion attaches to faith and actions. In Judaism, God considers people's actions to be more important than their faith. Acting in accordance with biblical and rabbinic law is the Jew's central obligation. So I've never had a rabbi ask me, what do I believe about God? And I don't hear Jews discussing theology very much. Rather, the focus is on behavior as governed by Jewish law. As Christianity developed, however, it did away with most of these laws, and faith became its central demand. Malik, great to see you, Malik. That's a great honor, sir. All right, so history became the essence, faith became the essence of Christianity. Christian history reveals that this emphasis on faith over works was held by neither Jesus nor his immediate followers. The New Testament often notes that Jesus and his early followers stressed and observed Jewish law. Do not imagine that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets, Jesus declared to his early disciples. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry, this guy's got to go. And I tell you solemnly, till heaven and earth disappear, not one dot, not one little stroke shall disappear from the law of the Torah till its purpose is achieved. And yeah, absolutely, a Jew invented communism, but a Christian also invented communism, because Karl Marx's parents converted to Christianity. And then Karl Marx was baptized into Christianity. So why can't we blame Karl Marx on the Christians? Why do we have to blame him on the Jews? Okay, so not one dot or stroke will disappear from the law until its purpose is achieved. And the purpose of the law is, of course, the universal recognition of the rule of God, a goal which neither Christianity nor Judaism has been realized. And Jesus then concluded his message with the warning against anyone who violates Jewish law. Therefore, the man who infringes even the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be considered the least in the kingdom of heaven. So if you want a good Goy on Jew discussion, I was just listening to the podcast Between Two Lampshades. So someone calling himself Isaac Cohen, claiming to be an atheist and a neoconservative Jew. I've never heard of him. I think it's a pseudonym. But I've listened to 26 minutes of the podcast so far, and it's with Mike Enoch. And it's a reasonable listen so far. It's fun to take in these Jew-Gentile debates. Yes, why not blame Karl Marx on the Germans? Though after his death, Jesus' disciples continued to heed their teacher's message to observe Jewish law. Acts 2 and 3 state the disciples regularly prayed at the temple. Acts chapter 10 recounts Peter's scrupulous observance of kashrut, the Jewish dietary laws. Acts 15 teaches that some men came down from Judea to teach that unless you have yourselves been circumcised in the tradition of Moses, you cannot be saved. In Acts 21, James says to Paul, let everyone know that there is no truth in the reports they have heard about you and that you still regularly observe the law. Okay, that phrase about being saved. When Jews speak about being saved, it's in this world. It's from this worldly issues, and it's the whole focus of Judaism and of Jews is on this world. When Christians talk about being saved, it's about being saved to the next world. So using saved is completely different. So Louis says, was Marx's father a Talmudic scholar? No way. There's no way his father was a Talmudic scholar and converted to Christianity. So had he at some point studied a little Talmud, I've studied thousands of hours of Talmud, but I'm far from a Talmudic scholar. So there's no way that Marx's father was some kind of formidable scholar of Talmud. Atman, I was raised in a Christian family and was taught from an early age that Jews are God's chosen people, while my own race and culture was significant. Wow, it's kind of sad that you're taught some other people were God's chosen. Like, why wouldn't anyone believe that their own religion, that their own people are the chosen ones of the universe or in God's eyes? And why would anyone be taught that their own race and culture is insignificant? That's just mind-blowingly pathological. Okay, it wasn't just Marx. The movement was heavily Jewish, even outside of Europe and past World War II. Yeah, heavily, meaning 10%, 15%, 20%, maybe 25% of the most important intellectuals in communism were Jewish. Yeah, my awakening started when I tried to define where the white race fits into the Bible. And Malik says that Karl Marx's father might have converted to avoid persecution. Sure, it wasn't life and death persecution. He had more economic opportunities by becoming a Christian. Not particularly impressive reason. There were two Jews who were talking about they heard you could get money if you converted to Christianity, and heard you could get, let's say, $1,000 if you converted to Christianity. And so one of them says, I'm going to try it. So he went to the priest, he got baptized, and when he came out of the baptism and came out of the church, his friend said, well, did you get the $1,000? And the baptized Jew said, well, isn't that just like a Jew, always talking about money? Oh, Louis, great to see you. You're the guy from a 75% black city in Michigan that refuses to ride the bus without a pistol handy. That sounds smart. And okay, so Isaac Cohen and Mike Enoch is interesting, but does Isaac Cohen really bring anything to the discussion? I know that Mike Enoch will bring something to the discussion, but does Isaac Cohen push any new ground? However, in the year 70, when the Jewish community in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, a new ideology regarding God's law became dominant in Christianity. The formulator of this new ideology was Paul of Tarsus, and he theorized as follows. All the laws of the Torah must be observed, therefore breaking one of them renders one cursed. Man being imperfect will sin by violating a law. Man is cursed by the law, and man must be redeemed from the law, redemption which can only come through belief in Jesus. So when you go to secular scholars of religion, virtually all secular scholars of religion will say that Paul was the real founder of Christianity and that Jesus did not believe himself to be divine, to be part of the triune Godhead, to exist from eternity, and that by dying on a cross, he was saving the world from sin. Okay, that's pretty much the consensus of all disinterested scholars of Christianity, just like all disinterested scholars of the Bible say that the Torah, 5 books of Moses, are a post-Mosaic composite work, and also scholars of Islam who are not Muslim say that the Quran was assembled together by various sources. It's not some kind of unitary work that dropped from heaven. Christianity wasn't for me. It's not for other Europeans. What religion do I think would provide good spiritual foundation for Europeans? I do not know. I think Christianity can, but I don't know. Okay, Judaism's differences with this Pauline ideology are profound. The Pauline idea that a person is cursed by God for breaking any law was a new one, not to be found anywhere in the Bible or in normative Judaism. From where then did Paul develop this notion? It appears from Galatians chapter 3 that he derived it from a mistaken reading of a verse in the Bible, Deuteronomy chapter 27. And what's interesting about Paul is that when you study his epistles, it's fairly apparent that he was never fluent in Hebrew. So while he proclaimed himself a great scholar of Judaism, he was far from that. He wasn't even knowledgeable in Hebrew. So anything that Paul says about the Hebrew Bible, it's hard to take seriously. It's obvious that he's using a translation of the Hebrew Bible. Texas says Isaac Cohen is still digesting race realism. He seems to believe in lifting all peoples, and only white European empires allow that to happen. He was just asking questions to Enoch. He wasn't adding much. Yeah, he didn't seem to add anything from just the little I heard, and it didn't seem like he had anything to add. So maybe he does, but it's not apparent that he has anything to add to the discussion. So I'm interested in some really smart Jews talking to the alt-right, arguing with the alt-right, challenging the alt-right, but they better bring something to the table that we don't already know. They better have some new insights. Okay, Paul misunderstood or intentionally changed this verse in Deuteronomy to mean that anyone who violates any law in the entire Torah is eternally cursed, a mistranslation which remains in the New Testament. The Bible appreciates that no human being can perfectly fulfill all its laws at all times, and it therefore understands that people will occasionally sin. Hundreds of years before Paul, the Jews were assured that God recognizes that there is no man so righteous who does only good and never sins. Furthermore, the Bible repeatedly tells of Jews who sinned, including Moses and David, who after repenting and returning to observance of the law, which they violated, were restored to God's grace, certainly without being eternally cursed. And Achman says that pre-Christian paganism or the Vedic traditions are most compatible with the white race, using perennialism to bring some sort of cohesion. Needless to say, Judaism does not want people to violate its laws, but if a Jew does violate them, Jewish law enables him to return to God and right action through repentance, teshuvah. That's the Hebrew word for return. And the notion of being eternally cursed by God, that's not a very Jewish notion. It raises 2 other new issues, hell and eternal damnation, concerning which it should be noted the word hell never appears in the Hebrew Bible, and eternal damnation is unknown to Judaism. The Bible does speak of Sheol, Hebrew word which has been mistranslated as hell, but this word means grave. Okay, tshuva, repentance in Judaism consists of 3 steps. The sinner must recognize his sin, feel sincere remorse at having sinned, and resolve to return to fulfilling the law. There's also a 4th step during the time of the temple, the bringing of a sacrifice. But since the destruction of the temple, this step has been unnecessary, a fact long foreseen by the Bible. In the words of Hosea, prophesying of a time when the temple would no longer be standing, turn to the Lord, say to him, forgive all iniquity and receive us graciously, so we will offer the prayers of our lips instead of calves. Hosea's statement is paralleled by Proverbs 21:3, to do righteousness and justice more acceptable to God than sacrifices. It seems like Christians think that Judaism can't exist without a temple, but there was no temple in Judaism from 586 before the Common Era until about year 100 before the Common Era. And there also wasn't a temple prior to King Solomon building the first one around 3,000 years ago. So from a non-Jewish perspective, a big golden temple with priests in fancy robes sacrificing calves, like the spectacle would make them think, this is the center of Judaism. But it may well be the woodcutter and the water carrier who was teaching the Torah who had the real hold over the Jewish people and was the true leaders of Judaism and of Jews, even though they lived humble lives and they didn't have the fancy robes. So when the temple was destroyed in year 70 of the Common Era, Jews and Judaism just kept on trucking. It wasn't nearly the devastating blow to Jewish identity and to Judaism that many Christians believe it was or is. And the book of Jonah recounts that when the people of Nineveh repented, their sins were forgiven by God, despite the fact that they brought no sin offering. Finally, the doctrine that God would curse man, whom he created imperfect, for being imperfect, is one which depicts God as cruel and sadistic, notions utterly foreign to Judaism. Yeah, like from a Jewish perspective, that God would curse human beings whom he created imperfect for being imperfect, that makes absolutely no sense. Perennialism. Perennial wisdom is a perspective in modern spirituality that views each of the world's religious traditions as sharing a single truth. And it's a real honor to have Malik Obama in the chat room. He's said a lot of hilarious things over the years. Okay, Judaism considers people's actions more important than their faith. Like, that just makes sense. If you're going to have a religion, wouldn't you want to stress behavior more than faith, the deed more than creed? Oh, Iffa, thank you about the bus stop in Finland that demonstrates my theory. So how do you get YouTube messages? I've never received a YouTube message. So yeah, I don't know how to get YouTube messages. Isaac thought that asking Enoch about eugenics was a curveball, and Enoch was all about eugenics for welfare recipients and criminals. Yeah, that's the only new thing brought up. Yeah, like, who isn't for eugenics for welfare recipients and criminals? Like, why would you want to perpetuate their genes? That's crazy talk. So anyway, Ipa, tell me, how do you retrieve YouTube messages? I never recall receiving a message. Oh, youtube.com messages. That's fascinating. How many messages must I have? I've never ever received. Oh, wow. I have all these messages. So first of all, there's one from Ippo. Oh yeah, they're all lining up in the snow. Like, they're not bunched together. And yeah, tell me how you think this picture illustrates the point that I made about Northern Europeans evolving kinship based on morality rather than kinship, because the landscape was so harsh that it did not allow for large numbers of kin in one small area. Wow, I've got all these YouTube messages. Okay, Jack says, Mr. Ford, I recently discovered your channel. It's very interesting. I have a love-hate relationship with the Jews. They are remarkable people for both good and bad. I'm curious, I take it that you're a convert. How do born Jews treat you, especially knowing that you're right-wing? I have no problem 95% of the time, 99% of the time. They treat me just like any other Jew. Leftovers, I really enjoyed your interview with Richard Spencer. Much better questions than I normally hear. How did you get him to agree to the interview? I just asked. I just sent a request. And Frank says, Mr. Ford, thank you for making your YouTube videos. I watched the one titled Torah Portion Shemini, and I'm hooked, and I'm looking forward to more like these. It's really refreshing to hear you speak about topics that are important to me, like mass immigration, the Shoah business, the Holocaust business, and the Jewish view of the rest of the human race in a nuanced and calm manner. Also, Jessica's smile is beautiful and contagious. I've repeatedly caught myself smiling back at the screen. You picked a great partner. Thank you for the work. I'll be sure to tune in next time. So, wow, I've got all these YouTube messages that I never thought to check. Okay, great. Back to the chat room. Okay, cool. Louis, you're down with that eugenics plan. You don't receive public benefits. You have too much pride to go on the dole. You have no criminal record, so let's sterilize criminals. Let's sterilize people who take public assistance, and let's sterilize people who don't have a certain level of IQ. If they can't graduate high school or take a high school equivalency test and pass it, like, why do we want those genes perpetuating themselves? Judaism considers people's actions more important than their faith. The Talmud, basing itself on Jeremiah, stated, better that the Jews abandon me, God, and continue to observe my laws. Because the Talmud adds, through the observance of the laws, they will return to God. Now, despite the Bible's emphasis on deed more than creed, Paul declared in Romans 3:28 that a man is put right with God only through faith, not by doing what the law commands. Owing to the Pauline doctrine as formulated in Romans, criterion by which Catholics came to judge people was faith plus sacraments. The father of Protestantism, Martin Luther, differed from the church, not in stressing the supremacy of good deeds, but in stressing that faith alone without sacraments is sufficient. Luther declared, above all things, bear in mind what I said, that faith alone without works justifies, sets free, and saves. So as a result, millions of Christians to this day believe that in God's eyes, a person's conduct is less important than his beliefs. Many Christian clerics accordingly persecuted people for their beliefs. And Malik makes a great point. Eugenics is a dirty word nowadays because of the Nazis, but United States and Scandinavia practice eugenics far more than the Nazis ever did. And of course, the Jews have practiced eugenics, from the beginning of the Jews. It may be objected that Christians who have committed evil acts have misconstrued Paul. Perhaps they have, for Paul certainly advocated loving behavior. What remains, however, that whereas in Judaism the good people of all nations attain salvation, in Christianity, belief in Christ, not good deeds, had to become the sole means to salvation, since, as Paul reasoned, if good deeds could achieve salvation, there would be no purpose to the crucifixion, and Christ would have died in vain. Why can't you sterilize people based on low IQ? Like, we should have certain tests, and if people can't pass the test, then they got to be sterilized. You know, I would favor, say, below 95. You really can't have a civilization without an average IQ of at least 97. So certainly anyone with an IQ below 90 or 95, I believe, should be sterilized. I mean, I drive around in Los Angeles. There are way too many people on the public roads. Did you know that the death rates for traffic accidents, according to one study in Australia, between people with an IQ of 80 to 90 versus 100 to 105, the one standard deviation lower IQ crowd were twice as likely to die in traffic accidents. Like, low IQ people are just mucking up our roads, getting in accidents, just causing mayhem, and not just our roads, just our whole society. They're I mean, they're just like, one idiot in line at McDonald's or the post office, would delay 20, God-fearing, hard-working people because he's such an idiot he doesn't know how to fill out the proper forms. Like stupid people are just, ruining our lives, and we just pay the stupid tax, and we just think nothing of it. We just stand in line because some moron doesn't know how to fill out, a simple postage form, certified mail, return receipt requested. It's just too much for him. And so 20 good people stand in line and they don't protest. It's the stupid tax. Like, what stupid tax have you paid today? Like the morons who don't drive correctly, so they get in accidents, or they just make driving hazardous and unpleasant for the rest of us. Oh. Hippo says in Finland, it is considered rude if you even look at someone when you walk past them. I think people respect other people's spaces because of this evolutionary tendency to spread out due to environment. Great point. So 3 major dogmas distinguish Christianity from Judaism: original sin, the second coming, and atonement through Jesus' death. To Christians, these beliefs are needed to solve otherwise insoluble problems. For Jews, however, these beliefs are not needed because the problems do not exist. Yeah, okay, I'm fine with starting to sterilize at 90 and below. Yeah, and Altman says every car wreck I've been involved in was involved a minority. A Mexican totaled my Taurus, and a black lady totaled my Silverado. And I bet you their average IQs were not over 95. They put poison in the water to lower the IQ. That's nonsense. Christian problem number 1, original sin. Christian solution: acceptance of Christ through baptism. In Judaism, original sin is not a problem. The notion that we are born sinners is not a Jewish one. Each person is born innocent. He makes his own moral choice to sin. Christian problem number 2, the messianic prophecies were not fulfilled when Jesus came. Christian solution: the second coming. Solution is untenable to Jews. The Jewish Bible never mentions a second coming. Christian problem number 3, people cannot attain salvation through their actions. Christian solution: Jesus' death atones for the sins of those who have faith in him. This problem does not exist for Judaism, since according to Judaism, people can attain salvation through their actions. Yeah. They're impurifying our vital bodily fluids by putting fluoride into the water, and they're turning the freaking frogs gay. Since Jesus generally practiced Pharisaic, meaning rabbinic Judaism, Ippo says Sweden used to have an average IQ of 101. Now it's around 95. How's that working out? It's creating havoc. Like, see all the massive crime and rape and rampant social dislocation going on in Sweden as it's taking in all these low IQ Muslim immigrants. Okay. I'm not concerned about fluoride in the water. What sins of mankind was Jesus' death supposed to atone for? Since the Bible obliged only Jews to observe as man to God laws, the non-Jewish world could not have committed such sins. The only sins which non-Jews could have committed were against people. So does Jesus' death atone for people's sins against other people? Apparently so. This doctrine directly opposes Judaism and its perception of moral culpability. According to Judaism, God himself cannot forgive us for our sins against another person. Only the persons we have hurt can forgive us. Yeah, remove the refugees, the 101 IQ will be instantly restored. Yeah, 85 IQ is basically the bare minimum required to work. And anything lower than that, you're just going to become a net drain. I mean, theoretically, you could have someone sweeping the streets with a 70 IQ, but they'd need so much supervision. Now, the average IQ in sub-Saharan Africa is 70. And the reason that the African-American IQ is so high compared to other blacks around the world is that on average, American blacks are 1/4 white. Those parts of sub-Saharan Africa that are mixed with Arabs, they have slightly higher IQs. So Arabs have an average IQ around 80 to 85. There are a number of innovative teachings attributed to Jesus in the New Testament. It is impossible to know whether these statements were actually uttered by him or merely attributed to him. So from the perspective of secular scholarship, none of these sayings were said by Jesus because they're completely uncharacteristic for someone learned in Pharisaic Judaism. So the IQ for mental retardation is about 70. Jesus forgives all sins. The Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins. Even if one equates Jesus with God, a heretical notion to Judaism, this belief is a radical departure from Judaism. As already indicated, Judaism believes that God himself does not forgive all sins. God himself limits his power, but gives only those sins committed against him alone. As the Mishnah teaches, the Day of Atonement atones for sins against God, not for sins against man, unless the injured party has been appeased. Like this Christian thing where you just go to God for forgiveness. Like, let's say you steal from me and you go to God and he forgives you, but you never come to me to atone for your sin. I just think that's crazy. Like, you can only get forgiveness from the people you've harmed. You can't just show up to God and get forgiveness for all the women you've raped. Luke, what about the goyim are not people and you can do harm to them thing that the alt-writer says in the Talmud? Is that true? There's certainly a minority of hostile comments against non-Jews in the Talmud, but you do find far more positive comments about non-Jews in the Talmud than hostile comments. So remember, the Talmud was written in a time and place, like all literature. The time and place and context for the Talmud was that Jews were just coming off a massive genocide at the hands of the Romans, where about 1 million Jews had died, and Christianity was rising up and starting to put pressure against Jews. So in this very hostile environment, Jews responded with equally hostile sentiments against non-Jews. But in the United States of America, this kind of hostility against non-Jews is much, much rarer, because the United States has overwhelmingly been a hospitable country for Jews. Eastern Europe and Russia were inhospitable places for Jews. So just as the Russians and the Eastern Europeans hated the Jews had their reasons for hating the Eastern Europeans and the Russians, as opposed to Western Europe, where Jews, generally speaking, had high regard for their Gentile fellow citizens and high regard for the cultures of England and France and Germany and Scandinavia. So it depends in the context. If you're going to look at Jewish writings from contexts where Jews have horrible relations with non-Jews, you're going to find horrible sentiments about non-Jews in those Jewish writings. If you're looking at Jewish writings that emerge out of an environment where Jews have excellent relationships with non-Jews, like America today, then generally speaking, the sentiments about non-Jews are going to be similarly positive. What is my opinion on Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism? I don't really have much interest in it. So from a traditional Jewish perspective, a man should not study Kabbalah until he has learned it in Torah and Talmud, and he's married and he has kids and he's over 40. So Yeah, those anti-Goyim statements are understandable given that they take place in a certain context. Now, just like I could wrench statements that any individual here has said and then publish them on the front page of the New York Times, and you'd look evil, because all of us have said statements that if wrenched out of context would make us look evil. So we've also all done things that if they were put on 60 Minutes, a videotape of them was put on 60 Minutes, we'd look horrible. So there's certainly a lot of horrifying statements in the Talmud, just as all of us in our private lives say statements that most people would regard as horrifying at times, if we're put under enough pressure. Jesus' attitude toward evil people: offer the wicked man no resistance. On the contrary, if anyone hits you on the right cheek, offer him the other as well. Love your enemies, pray for your persecutors. Judaism, by contrast, demands that the wicked man be offered powerful resistance. One of many such examples is the biblical approval of Moses' killing of the Egyptian slave master who was beating a Jewish slave. Second example is the oft-repeated biblical injunction, you shall burn the evil out of your midst. Similarly, Judaism does not demand that one love one's enemies, but it does command that one act justly towards one's enemies. Okay, a Jew is not, for example, commanded by Judaism to love a Nazi. Texas, what's funny is race and IQ has red-pilled me on the work hard, you can succeed crap. Made me see that the white working class needs a safety net and something like unions. Yeah, they need help. And they need eugenics so that we breed superior people. Like the whole purpose of a country is to develop a particular people, to develop a race, to make it finer and stronger and smarter. So I think we should stop subsidizing dummies. We should stop spending millions and billions of dollars on people towards the end of life. Like I say, after someone has taken up, $100,000 of Medicare spending, they need to either pay for their own medical care from that point on, or they should be euthanized. Like we can't keep spending millions of dollars on people extending their lives for just a few weeks in horrible circumstances. If you're 70 years old, you can't contribute to society anymore, you've used up $100,000 in Medicare spending, then you either need to fund your own medical care, get your family to fund it, or be euthanized. Jesus' claim that people can only come to God through him. No one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. This differs from the Jewish belief that everyone has direct access to God, for God is near to all who call upon him. So many Christians believe that only one who believes in Jesus Christ, aka a Christian, can come to God. Judaism holds that anyone can come to God. You don't need to become a Jew. Why do Jews not accept Jesus as the Messiah? Jews do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah because he did not fulfill any of the messianic prophecies, not a single one. Okay, it's been over 1900 years since Jesus walked around, and the messianic days of peace have not arrived. Even Christian scholars are now acknowledging the illegitimacies of attempts to prove Jesus' messiahship from the Hebrew Bible. J.C. Fenton, in his book, The Gospel of Matthew, wrote, "It is now seen that the Old Testament was not a collection of detailed forebodings of future events, which could only be understood centuries later. The Old Testament writers were in fact writing for their contemporaries in a way which could be understood by them, in describing things that would happen more or less in their own lifetime. Thus, Matthew's use of the Old Testament now a stumbling block to the 20th century reader of his gospel." And there are some Hebrew Bible prophecies which they ignore and others which they modify. And the New Testament interpretation of Psalms chapter 16, it misreads the clear intention of the psalmist. So in some, call anyone who does not actually bring about the Messianic era, the Messiah, is completely untenable to Jews. To equate anyone with God, as normative Christianity does, is to Jews even more untenable because it compromises their ideal of monotheism. Hey, Pravada is here. Great to see you, my friend. So very significant differences between Judaism and Christianity, mainly on the stress on behavior in Judaism versus theology in Christianity. In Judaism, the stress is on deed, and on Christianity, the stress is on creed. Hey, Ippa says, I'm Finnish, and we have not been kicked out of 109 nations. Congratulations, like the Finnish are amazing. And is it Occupied, that season 2? I can't wait till season 2 of Occupied comes on Netflix. I really enjoyed season 1, but what was it? Was it set in Finland? Did Finland fight the war against the Soviet Union in 1940, like the White Winter War, where, yeah, I love Occupy. What a great show. But I think, wasn't it Finland who took on the Soviet Union and fought them to a standstill for months? And there was one sniper, Finnish sniper, who killed like 600 Russians in 1939. That was an amazing war. I watched this mini-series about it, how this tiny nation of Finland held off the Soviet Union for many months. Yeah, Finns are absolutely formidable people. Yeah, Malika Obama says, I thought the opposite was true, but one of the reasons why there was friction between Jesus and the Israelites was because Jesus said that everyone could be saved by God. No, Judaism has always held that all good people can be saved, that all good people have a place in the world to come. And Judaism has never held that you need to be Jewish to go to God, to have access to God. Like, God is available to everybody, Jew or Gentile. There's no need to be Jewish to be saved. There's no need to become Jewish to have access to God. There's never been a time when Jews thought that only Jews would be saved. Jews have always held that all good people have a place in the world to come. So therefore, there's no need for non-Jews to convert to Judaism. So one way of summarizing Judaism is by the idea of just ethical monotheism. And that's the idea that there's one God who rules the universe, and his primary concern is ethics. His primary concern is how we treat one another. And God's primary demand is that people act decently towards one another. And if everybody subscribed to this belief, which would not require anyone to leave any specific religion or give up any racial or national identity, I think the world would experience far less evil. And where are my notes here? Okay, so for Christians, however, the theology teaches that the most important thing is not behavior, it's not ethical behavior, it's not, treating other people decently, but that other people come to adopt your theological beliefs, that you develop correct faith, not correct works. So from a Jewish perspective, correct deeds are the most important thing. From a Christian perspective, correct creed is the most important thing. So Paul said in Galatians chapter 2:21, if good deeds could lead to salvation, Christ would have died in vain. That's true. From a Jewish perspective, good deeds lead to salvation. Therefore, there was no need for a Christ, dying on a cross. According to Paul, a man is put right by God only through faith and not by doing what the law commands. Now, the Jewish perspective is that people are made right by doing right, not by believing right or thinking right. And the Catholic Church has usually put the stress on faith is more important than deeds. And for nearly 2 millennia, most Christians held that even the most kind and decent and ethical non-Christian was doomed. The Catholic Church for millennia held that outside the church there is no salvation. Now, in the 20th century, the Catholic Church has reinterpreted this statement and now teaches that while salvation will only come through Jesus, it's not necessary for an individual to assert belief in Jesus by name in order to be saved, because only God judges who is saved. But historically, the thrust of church teachings has not been that cruelty, rape or murder or torture or unethical behavior are the greatest sins. As the historian Norman Cohn wrote, the sins to which the devil of Christian tradition has tempted human beings are varied indeed: apostasy, idolatry, heresy, fornication, gluttony, vanity, using cosmetics, dressing luxuriously, going to the theater, gambling, avarice, quarreling, spiritual sloth have all at times figured in the list. I've looked in vain for a single instance of the devil tempting a human being to cruelty. So from a Jewish perspective, the greatest sin is gratuitous human cruelty. And many of the statements attributed to Jesus, lead Christians to abandon the fight against gratuitous cruelty. So resist not evil, one of the famous statements of Jesus, pray for those who persecute you, love your enemies, forgive the murderers. Christians can just show up to God and get forgiveness for the horrible things they've done. Or from a Jewish perspective, you can't show up to God unless you have obtained forgiveness from the people that you have hurt. Unless you've made it right with the people you have harmed, you cannot even show up to God. Reverend Billy Graham, perhaps the most widely listened to Protestant in the world at his time, visited the Soviet Union in 1982, called on Soviet Christians to obey the Soviet authorities. He did not publicly side with persecuted Christians. And rather than refer to the Soviet Union as an enemy of Christianity, the Reverend Graham only referred to the common enemy of nuclear war. George Will wrote, Graham's delicacy about the Soviet Union is less interesting than his common enemy formulation. His language suggests a moral symmetry between his country and the Soviet Union. The Washington Post reports that when Billy Graham spoke in two churches, both were heavily guarded, with police sealing off all roads leading to them. Hundreds of KGB security agents were in the congregation. Graham told one congregation that God gives you the power to be a better worker, a more loyal citizen, because in Romans 13, we are told to obey the authorities. Wow, how is that for a message from America? Billy Graham was America's most famous Christian. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was Russia's most famous Christian. The contrast between the two is instructive. And another area of Christian theology that undermines ethical monotheism is the belief that God saves people irrespective of how they act, just as long as they have the right faith, the right theology, the right creed. So millions of Protestants hold that believers in Jesus, no matter how many cruel acts they perform, attain salvation, while non-believers in Jesus, no matter how much good they do in the world, how much they love God, they are doomed to eternal damnation. So to me, it makes more sense to stress the importance of your deeds rather than the importance of your theology. Faith without works is dead. Even Christianity says good works are a thing, but faith is what saves you. Yeah, so what's more important, your faith or your deeds? So if the Jewish Messiah has not come, how are Jews saved? It is by doing good deeds. Yeah, just by how that's, from the Jewish perspective, that's how God judges everybody, according to their deeds. Not according to their belief system, or not according to their race, not according to their faith, not according to their theology, just purely by how you act towards other people. So, good person of any nation, of any race, is saved from a Jewish perspective. So is grace a thing in Judaism? I guess, but it plays a very minor role. So the things that are primary in Judaism are secondary in Christianity. And the things that are primary in Christianity are secondary in Judaism. So for example, grace, faith, humility, creed, dogma, theology, these are all primary in Christianity, and these are all secondary in Judaism. In Judaism, what's primary is obeying the law, being a mensch, being a good person, judging people according to the quality of their deeds, action, behavior. That's what's most important. And matters of dogma and theology and faith and creed and grace and these matters humility, these are secondary. Also, another major difference between Christianity and Judaism is that Judaism really is a tribe. Like, Jews are not primarily members of a religion. They are primarily members of a tribe that then has its own religion. So most Jews are not religious. Most Jews do not observe Judaism. In the United States, about 15% of Jews observe Judaism in some form. About 12% are Orthodox. But they're still Jews because they're part of a tribe. So, Christians will go to church to pray to God, hear an inspiring message from their pastor, but Jews, by and large, will go to synagogue to be with other Jews for the social aspect, for the communal aspect, to just bond together and to eat good food and drink good wine, and to catch up on the news and to gossip and to see your friends, and like, it's more of a social thing. So if I were to take you to synagogue, we may be an hour in and you might ask me, when do services begin? But they've been going on the whole time. It's just considerably more informal. In outlook on the world, Christians tend more to a universal outlook, so that there's no notion that you can treat non-Christians with lower ethical standards than your own group. Judaism is a tribe, and all tribes have dual moralities. So there's one morality for how you treat the in-group, and then there's a more relaxed morality for how you treat the out-group. And you'll see this in the Torah itself, where Jews are commanded to not lend an interest to their fellow Jew, but of course they can lend an interest to non-Jews. Why were the 10 tribes kicked out of Judea? Well, what happened is that in 586, before the Common Era, so we're talking 2,600 years ago, Babylon conquered Israel, and they conquered it repeatedly because the Jews didn't behave. And so they finally, in 586, they destroyed the temple, and they carted off many Jews into captivity to Babylon and separated the rest. So the 10 tribes were just separated, and they just assimilated. And only basically the tribe of Judea, which also incorporated some of the survivors from the tribe of Benjamin, stayed true to having a Jewish identity. And most of the Jews that were in Israel that were of the tribe of Judea went to Babylon. So since that time, for the last 2,600 years, the majority of Jews have lived in the diaspora. They have not lived in the land of Israel. Western Man says, Judaism is a tribe with codified metaphysics for themselves alone. Christianity is a mutated offspring that posits moral universalism for egalitarian human members. Well, Judaism doesn't have codified metaphysics for themselves alone. Judaism has a lot to say about how Jews should treat non-Jews. And it's not that you can just take advantage of them and do anything to them. There are plenty of rules regulating Jewish behavior with non-Jews. And Judaism's always held that non-Jews have access to God, that all good non-Jews, along with all good Jews, have a place in the world to come. And yeah, genetics play a huge role. Northern Europeans have a primal urge for justice and morality, which has been turned into a moral universalism and a humanism that is itself an offshoot of Christianity. So what about Judaism and communism? So according to Karl Marx, right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and the cultural development thereby determined. We therefore reject every attempt to impose on us any moral dogma whatsoever as an eternal, ultimate, and forever immutable moral law. And Lenin said, we say that our morality is entirely subordinated to the interests of the class struggle of the proletariat. We do not believe in an eternal morality. We repudiate all morality derived from God and from non-class concepts. And Professor Wilfred Cantwell, in his book on Islam and moral history, said, for Marxism, there is no reason, literally no reason. Our universe, the movement posits, is the kind of universe where there cannot be conceivably any reason for not killing or torturing or exploiting a human person if his liquidation or torture or slave labor will advance the historical process. And contrast this with Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15. You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. You shall not respect the person of the poor, nor favor the powerful. Neither respect the worker nor favor the capitalist, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. So Judaism aims for a moral system that does not, favor either the worker or the capitalist. If I said she made a joke to this black joke to this guy who almost passed out. He's just so sensitive. Jews view all European guys as Christians. Yeah, that's just as like a broad brushstrokes. Just as non-Jews tend to view Jews as, oh, they're all Jews, or really Orthodox Jews are completely different group of people from secular Jews or Reformed Jews or even Jews in the conservative denomination. Dostoevsky once said, man only invented God so that he could live without killing himself. And this is the history of mankind from its origins up to the present day. That's good. So Marxism and Judaism, both motivated by the desire to perfect the world and establish a utopia on earth. When I first heard Dennis Prager and first encountered Jews and Judaism, I was very into Marxism. I was talking about the Netflix show earlier, was Occupied. It was about when Russia occupies, I think Norway. Is it Norway or Finland? One of those two Scandinavian countries. It was Judaism that first brought the utopian messianic vision to mankind from God's promise to Abraham, the first Jew. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. The prophet's unique expressions of universal brotherhood and peace, such as Isaiah's call to nations to beat their swords into plowshares. Marxism is the secular offshoot of Judaism's mission to perfect the world. And I believe you can find Occupied on Netflix, or you could at one point, but I really enjoyed it. Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, we are condemned to be free. Man takes absolute freedom for himself, but he can only feel this freedom as a condemnation. Metaphysical anguish is its counterpart. And Tom says it's annoying when a Jewish friend of his keeps calling him a Christian. Yeah, like from a Jewish perspective in the West, all non-Jews are Christians. Like that's like kind of the lazy, way of generalizing. Luke, do you believe that Marxism is heavily influenced by the Old Testament sentiment of freedom from work, i.e. that work is something to be freed from, contrast with the German ethic that work will set you free? Yeah, I think that Marxism and communism take something from a few utopian strands in the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians call the Old Testament. So you'll find these utopian strands of man being freed from work. But the dominant strand of the Hebrew Bible is 6 days a week you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. So that's the Jewish approach. You work 6 days a week. Yeah, the Russian hysteria on that show, Occupied, only comes from countries that don't border Russia. Yeah, I just think it's a fun show. I enjoyed the show. And Judaism is the perfect operating system for a marginalized and hated foreign group. They thrive on opposition and hatred. The more they are hated, the more nepotism has to grow to protect their in-group. Christianity, on the other hand, is something humble and powerfully good that literally conquered the world, later subverted by Jewish globalism. Well, Christianity didn't conquer the world simply by being sweetness and kindness. So Marxism is a secular offshoot of Judaism's mission to perfect the world. It is in this context that the messianism and utopianism of Karl Marx becomes explicable. The thinking of this grandson of two Orthodox rabbis. Okay, so his grandparents were Orthodox rabbis. It's not so much his father was a Talmudic scholar, but he had two Orthodox rabbis as grandparents. Okay, and so he was influenced by these utopian strands in the Jewish tradition. One person said that communism is Judaism in a hurry, which is amusing. It's not accurate, but it's amusing because Judaism is based on God-based ethics. It can never countenance the mass genocides of communism. Yeah, the Inquisition was humble and good. This Russian phobia is a neocon operation. Maybe. D. Michael Jones said, work, Jews don't work. You give a Jew a shovel, he'll try to sell it to you. Well, it's more that Jews are better suited for white-collar occupations. The majority of Ashkenazi Jews have been in white-collar occupations since the 15th century. So no other people can say that. Aryeh says the Hafez Chaim hated Russian communist leaders. That's true. The rabbis, generally speaking, hated communist Jews. Okay, wow, there was a Finnish soldier called Larry Thorne that fought in the Finnish army, the Waffen SS, and died in Vietnam. There are documentaries about him. I would like to check that. But the marksman was Simo Haya. He shot and killed about 600 Russians. If you think Jews hate work, I mean, Jews are very hardworking people. Our own Torah says 6 days a week shall you work, and then the seventh day you rest. Jews are not inclined towards manual labor. I mean, Jews have high verbal IQs, often high, mathematical IQs. Like, why would they work, for $30 an hour when they can earn $300 and $500 an hour? As a non-Jewish scholar, Edmund Wilson wrote in his History of Socialism, the characteristic genius of the Jew has been especially a moral genius. Nobody but a Jew, Karl Marx, could have fought so uncompromisingly and obstinately for the victory of the dispossessed classes. Thus, it is not to their motivating aims that one must look to find the essential differences between Marxism and Judaism. Yeah, I know you're joking. Bravado. This is the second area in which there are more similarities and differences between Marxism and Judaism. Both are all-encompassing worldviews. In fact, they may be both called religions. $30 an hour, where do I sign up? There's a guy who I see, several days a week, say hello to, and he earns well over $1 million a year. So I know quite a few Jews who earn over $1 million a year. I mean, I know them personally, and also countless Jews who earn over $500,000 to $1 million a year. So, why were Jews denied entry to the U.S. under the Immigration Act of 1924? Well, they weren't completely denied entry. The Immigration Act wanted to restore the traditional racial patterns of the United States prior to 1880. So it limited immigration from Eastern Europeans and instead allowed immigration from Western Europe. So there were still a few Jews in, but it was mainly, changing the countries where the United States wanted to receive immigrants. And it was that Immigration Restriction Act, 1924, that set the boom for American excellence, for social cohesion, and saw the United States become the most powerful nation the world has ever seen. How many Jews in this chat? My sense is one. I only see one. I think most of my audience tends to be atheists and non-Jews. And Louis says, E. Michael Jones' rejection of race is disturbing. His anti-Semitism being fueled solely by religion makes him look crazy. Yeah, so I asked him if he thought of Judaism as satanic, and he said, well, in the book of John, Jesus says to certain Jews, you are of your father the devil. And so he extrapolates from that Jesus views all Jews in all times as satanic. And then he also mentioned a quote in Revelation about the synagogue of Satan. So he extrapolates from those quotes that all Jews, for all time after the birth of Christianity, are satanic. What do I think about Jews from the Middle East? Well, the average Ashkenazi IQ is about 110. The average Sephardic IQ is about 97. The average Mizrahi IQ, meaning Middle Eastern Jews, is about 92. So the average white IQ is 100. So almost all high-achieving Jews are Ashkenazi Jews. Yeah, I don't think Jesus meant all Jews either, since the apostles were all Jews and the early Christians were all Jews. Yeah, Provided says we need to give the Jews in this chat a yellow star so that we can figure out who's who. Malik says, what's your interpretation on the synagogue of Satan? Well, Christianity and the Gospels and this whole religion of Jesus emerged outside of out of Judaism. There's tremendous conflict with the Jews, and so I understand Christians having their reasons for hating Jews, for hating synagogues, and for hating the Jewish establishment, which completely rejected them and perhaps even persecuted them. So, and I also have no problem believing that there are certain synagogues that are, I don't know, they're just like criminal enterprises. There's just so much criminal behavior going on by members of the synagogue, perhaps even facilitated by the synagogue. I absolutely believe that there are synagogues that are, organized criminal enterprises. Not the majority, very much a minority of synagogues, but yeah, I have no problem understanding that there are a minority of synagogues that fuel bad things in the world. And what about the Sephardim? The Sephardic Jews, they have an average IQ of 97. And the Mizrahi Jews, average IQ of 92. So it's very hard for a group with an average of 110 IQ to have much intercourse with groups that have a 97 IQ and a 92 IQ. There's not a lot of interconnection between the various Jewish groups. Like, I remember getting to a synagogue that was a very wide open, friendly place, but all the Persian Jews would gather together there. The Sephardic Jews would do their own thing, and the mainstream Ashkenazi Jews would run the synagogue, would fund the synagogue. They were the people making over $500,000 a year. And then the Ethiopian Jews, like, they have no Jewish DNA. They're not Jews, but because Jewish elites thought that this would prove that Zionism is not racism, they accepted their claims to be Jewish, and tried to use them for PR, and brought 120,000 to Israel. It's been an absolute disaster, and made them go through a formal conversion process, but completely dumbed it down, because the average Ethiopian IQ was 70. So, like, why would any nation want to import 120,000 low IQ Ethiopians? It's just been an absolute disaster for Israel. Do Jews really view all non-Jews as animals in human form? No, that's very much a minority view. It's in times of great persecution, or people who come from generations that experience great persecution or just horrible relationships with non-Jews, and if they're particularly highly ethnocentric, then they may have some incentives to have some negative views of Jews. But I've never even ever heard a Jew refer to non-Jews as all animals in human form. Now, I'm sure you can find that sentiment here and there in some Jewish writings produced in a context of persecution and massive hatred going in both directions between Jews and non-Jews. Persian Jews in LA are very successful, absolutely, because it was the smartest Jews who left Iran. So immigration generally discriminates, the more challenging it is, in favor of very intelligent people. Israel has a storm on the horizon. I can't tell you how many blacks in America think that they're the real Jews. Well, Israel's certainly having massive problems with its Ethiopian imports. Yeah, we was Hebrews. What would be an alt-right brain force? Is that a supplement? Yeah, let me sell a supplement. Look for is alt-right brain force. To the believing Marxist, Marxism is a religion. It has its own gods, man and materialist progress, its own prophet, Karl Marx, its apostles, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. It has its absolute materialism, its ethic, proletarian solidarity. It has its utopian visions, all-embracing, and its community of believers, traditions, schisms, and even churches. First Moscow, and then, since the Chinese Reformation, Beijing and other smaller churches. The religious essence of Marxism is superficially obscured by Marx's rejection of the traditional religions. Like medieval Christianity, Marx's system undertakes to provide an integrated, all-inclusive view of reality, an organization of all significant knowledge in an interconnected whole, a frame of reference within which all possible questions of importance are answered or answerable. So Marxism, Judaism have similar goals in a utopian messianic age. They're both all-inclusive worldviews, but they are diametrically opposed one another in almost every single way. Yeah, some countries want to import sub 100 IQ people to make them work bottom tier jobs and keep the good jobs for the natives. Yeah, that's really dumb thinking. We see the results of that in Europe, because if you bring low IQ people in, you bring massive dysfunction. They clog up the roads, they get into accidents, they just impose a stupid tax on everybody. So you probably heard the expression nigger tax, and that's, when someone has this, horrible interaction with blacks. Say, blacks are, doing something criminal, or doing something stupid, or that holds them up in line, or makes them afraid to walk the streets at night. Okay, and then I'm sure there are plenty of non-Jews who've had horrible experiences, with Jews, and so they can describe their horrible experiences as the Jew tax. That's the tax we have to pay for having Jews in our country. Or I'm sure Protestants have had lots of bad experiences with Catholics, and say, oh, that's the Catholic tax, that's corruption and low moral standards, that's the tax that we have to pay for having Catholics. But we all pay an enormous stupid tax. Like, whites pay far more in taxes than they ever receive in government services, while blacks consume massive more government services than they ever pay in taxes. Latinos also consume more government services than they ever pay in taxes. And this basically breaks down on IQ levels. So the average African American IQ is 85, the average Latino IQ in America is 90. And so these low IQ groups are going to want more and more social welfare spending and high taxes on high achievers, so that they can shake down the high achievers and get as much government welfare for themselves. So you really destroy a country when you bring in low IQ types. Yeah, Sweden has employed 550 migrants out of 200,000 migrants. And what about the natives that were working those bottom tier jobs? They get outcompeted by immigrants who will work for less. I have not studied much Kabbalah, just not interested in it. Western Man says, look, stop the Catholic bashing. The most moral communities I've lived in were Catholic rather than Protestant. Okay, well, just point out to me Roman Catholic countries that have the low levels of corruption, the high levels of civic duty and social trust and cohesion of Anglo countries. I can't think of any Roman Catholic country that is the equivalent for low corruption and high social trust of England when it was Anglo, United States when it was Anglo, those parts of Canada that were Anglo, and Australia and New Zealand that were Anglo, like Ireland, Austria, France, Poland, Belgium, all had far more corruption, far less social trust, far less trust in social institutions than the Anglo countries. That's why England ruled the world, because it had cohesion, it had high social trust, and had low levels of corruption. That's why England repeatedly kicked France's ass in military conflicts. So England ran the world until the United States of America ran the world, both Anglo countries. And even Argentina at its best was not the equal in lack of corruption and high social cohesion and high social trust as the great Anglo countries of England, the United States, and Australia. So until I see a Catholic country produce results that are equivalent to what Anglos have produced, then I just don't see what are the benefits to a Protestant country to allow Catholics in, because whenever you bring Catholics in, like, massive corruption goes with it. Like, Catholic politicians were always assumed to be on the take in this country, and for very obvious reasons is that in a high percentage of the time they were on the take. Now watch that Netflix documentary, The Keepers, about corruption in Baltimore, because Catholics are a corporate culture. Like, Protestants are individualist, but Catholics are corporatists. So if there's a large number of Catholics in a town like Baltimore, they will come to dominate the police force, the district attorney's office, the political machine, and they'll all be in bed together, and they will cover things up, they will make crony deals, they will make payoffs, and I just don't see what's in it for Anglos. Okay, Greg Johnson once said that he sees religious Judaism as a phase of Jewish history. See Jews getting more secular and atheistic with time. Well, I don't think Jews are more secular or atheistic than non-Jews at equivalent IQ levels. So you'll notice that people with IQ levels over 130 have a much higher percentage of atheists among them and secularists than people with lower IQs. Yeah, Catholics practice dual morality, while Protestants were much more willing to trust a stranger. Protestants don't tend to practice dual morality. Anglo countries ran the world because of their rule of the seas. Britain never had a land army as powerful as France. Well, why did England rule the world? Is it because they ruled the seas? Well, why couldn't France rule the seas? Britain had the social cohesion and the lack of corruption and the practical turn of mind that enabled it to be such excellent administrators. Yeah, half of Germany is Catholic, so that is a good point. Look, the low levels of corruption come from hyper-individualism, which eventually breaks a society down. We need to all learn to be more corporatists. You should listen to Enoch's talks, to Isaac Cohen on Between Two Lampshades, very intellectual discussion. Yeah, I listened to it, just wondering, am I going to learn anything on it? Does Isaac Cohen bring anything to that discussion? Like, so far, I haven't heard anything from him that is new. So is there anything that breaks ground in that discussion between Isaac Cohen and Mike Enoch? I know Mike Enoch brings it. Every time I hear him, the guy has great content. Just wondering, does Isaac Cohen contribute anything? Why are Jews money-grubbing whores? Well, you could also ask, why are Jews sex maniacs? Or Jews and Judaism are much more comfortable with the natural passions. Like, Judaism accepts that people want money, want fame, want honor, want sex, and it tries to direct those passions in constructive ways. But Jews are much more emotional and much more likely to wear their heart on their sleeve. So as opposed to more restrained Anglos, keep a stiff upper lip, Jews are much more likely to tell you what's on their mind. So Jews will strike non-Jews, particularly Protestants, as being money grubbing, as being obsessed with status and honor and fame. And Jews will regard the Anglos as fake, as denying the importance of these drives. So Jews are going to seem crude, are going to seem primitive to non-Jews, just as non-Jews are frequently going to seem, false and overly restrained and constrained and artificial to Jews. England starved Ireland in 1845, and the British government before that was more trusted by normal Irish people. Yeah, like England and Ireland have had, a mutually hateful relationship. In Germany, the predominantly Catholic regions are more successful. That's a great point. Have I had my IQ tested? I did IQ tests online, and it was always like 121 to 127. Why do Jews have big honking noses? You'll notice that Middle Eastern people have bigger noses because something to do with processing air in a humid environment, while people from more northern regions of the world in very cold environments will have much narrower nasal passages because something to do with heating the cold air. Yeah, Spain had a massive navy, and England kicked its ass. Portugal ruled the world for quite a while, and they were Catholic. That's true. Yeah, Cohen brings nothing. That's my impression. I've only listened to 26 minutes, but I think I can tell, like, someone just has to say a few words, and I get a sense of how smart they are. And he just didn't seem to bring anything. Provided I thought Cohen would come in swinging a lot more. He called himself the alt-right killer and then limped in with Enoch. I still enjoyed it. Yeah, but Cohen doesn't bring anything. Does dual morality require lying? That might be a harder barrier to entry for Northern Europeans. That is a good question. There are certainly tendencies to that. If you have a strong in-group identity and a dual morality, it'll certainly be a lot easier for you to justify lying to outsiders. Luke, you seem to have the same disheveled and neurotic attitude that is stereotypically typical of Ashkenazi Jewry, but I agree with this statement. I don't see myself as disheveled and neurotic, but why did Isabella consent to the Inquisition and expulsion of Jews in the year 1478? Did Judaism have anything to do with the destruction of their national religion and prosperity? Well, different groups have different interests. So if you want to create a strong corporate Christian society, like Spain in the 15th century, why would you want to have Jews in there? You wouldn't want Protestants in there, and you wouldn't want Jews in there. So Catholic countries tend to be corporate rather than individualist. And so Jews have always done far better in individualist societies, such as Protestant societies, because the group strategy that Jews often practice, is generally speaking going to outcompete an individualist strategy. It's like when you ask, why did Isabella consent to the Inquisition and expulsion of Jews? Well, think about Saudi Arabia. Like, Saudi Arabia is, the holiest Muslim nation. Would it be enhanced by the immigration of 10,000 Jews? No. If you want an Islamic state, you're not going to want Jews or Christians there. If you want a Christian state, a corporate Catholic Christian state, why would you want Protestants and Jews there? It just kind of goes against that purpose. So some great stuff in the chat room, and good to see Resurrection Jose. So the biggest difference between Judaism and communism concerns God and man, whereas for Judaism, God is the Lord, there is none other. For Marx, the highest being for man is man himself. Man is God from a Marxist perspective, and conversely, as Engels wrote, God is man. Moreover, the Marxist man-God is a jealous God who tolerates no other gods. Marx wrote that human self-consciousness is the supreme divinity, by the side of which none other shall be held. And it's coming up on my Sabbath. So, Westerman, do you know that the surname Ford is also an Irish surname as well as an Anglo one? Are you a crypto-potato-Aryan? Yes, I have a famous Irish ancestor. He was a revolutionary who repeatedly rebelled against the British and was shipped to Australia. His name's Michael Dyer. I think D-W-Y-E-R, Michael Dyer. So part of my heritage is this famous Irish revolutionary. And but most of my heritage comes from England and from France. What is pilpul? It's tricky legal reasoning. Is it Ashkenazi intelligence or a manipulative rhetoric-based cunning? It's just tricky legal reasoning. And look forward to talking to you guys later. But for now, bye-bye.